Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. For those of you who are joining me for the first time, welcome. For everyone else, welcome back. It's lovely to see your names pop up. So just by way of housekeeping, feel free to raise your hand if I am not making sense or you want me to go back and cover something. But if you have a question that can wait till the end, I will be fielding questions at the very end. Today's topic is the 6 reasons that analytic and business professionals are destined to clash. It's a topic that's important to me because I've been on both sides and I have been a part of some of those tensions between the two groups. We have to remind ourselves that analytics in business is not succeeding the way that it could. If you look at MIT or Harvard Business Review, we see articles over and over again about how companies are failing to achieve the type of data-driven outcomes that they want to achieve. And in most of these articles, what I find is that they don't blame it on inadequate resources. They don't blame it on inadequate skills or lack of computing power. What they identify is that there is a problem at the interface between the data science function and the business at large. So what happens is we don't communicate as well as we could. And we're going to explore a little bit today about some of the reasons that that happens. So before we begin, I'm going to have my co-host, Anita, bring up a poll, just so that I know who it is that I am talking to. Would you consider yourself to be primarily business focused, analytics focused, evenly split between the two, or some kind of other? All right. So what we see is we have some folks who are at the interface. We have some folks who are analytics focused, and we have a few who are other defined and not related to either one. Okay, well, that is very helpful. Okay, so when I did a survey on LinkedIn about 6 weeks ago, I did one survey where I asked business people how they describe their interaction with data teams. And I asked, so do you get what you need and do you understand what you need? What we see is that only 1 in 5 thought, or 1 in 5 thought it really went poorly. Only 7% thought it was awesome. And about 2/3 really described it quite negatively. So then I asked, what about the analytic people? How do they feel about their interactions with business? And specifically, I said, do the business folks share the context? Do they ask for your input? And it's almost a mirror image. Only 1 in 5 believe that it's very frustrating. Only 8% think it's great. And 2/3 think that it's quite negative. So it wasn't just things that I was reading, it's things I've experienced and maybe many of you have experienced. So why is this happening? Today, I'm going to walk through some of the reasons why we are destined to have tension. I started thinking about this, and let's just start with the obvious. Number 1, these two professions attract different kinds of people. If you use the personality inventory, the Myers-Briggs, and you look up what the most common of these personalities are, business leaders will be extroverted and data scientists will be somewhat introverted. Business leaders will be in the category of S, which is considered observant and more detail-oriented, whereas data scientists will be intuitive, big picture, thinking about possibilities. They agree on one dimension, which is they are both thinkers rather than feelers. And business leaders will be in the J category, which is decisive and trying to categorize yes or no, whereas the data scientists will be prospecting the P, which is exploring all the different possibilities. So already we see that we are 3/4 in these different personality types, different and opposite on each of these different dimensions. Now, I will admit today that we will be using some stereotypes. I have belonged in both categories. And so when I am making fun of a category, I am making fun of myself. And stereotypes exist for a reason, and we'll get into that. The second thing about personality is we also start to use a different kind of language. This is because we become experts in a particular area. So business leaders will talk about EBITDA and price to earnings ratio, their own KPIs and net revenue, whereas data scientists will be talking about variance explained, p-values, and how their R-squared works. So as we look at these two types, there is a reason for each of them. So take, for example, if we consider the analytic type to be somewhat similar to Sheldon in Big Bang Theory, and we ask Sheldon, does your product improve business performance? Sheldon will say something like, our analysis controlled for demographics, tenure, previous performance, location, and job type. We did a time series analysis, removing seasonality, transforming the outcome into a binomial, showing that participants had significantly higher likelihood of improvement at a p-value of 0.02. This is a useful explanation for other analysts. On the other hand, if we think of a stereotypical business executive as Don Draper from Mad Men, and you ask Don Draper, does your product improve employee performance? He will say, yes. Next question. We have different styles and we see the world in a particular way. The second reason that we will clash has to do with training. So when a business leader goes through the mentorship of climbing the corporate ladder, or they go to an MBA program, they are asked to become clear and action-oriented. So they are asked to think about what differentiates their business from another business, to assess what opportunities are available to them, to decide which one is the most appropriate course of action, pivot quickly when necessary to address the new threats, and take specific action for success. That is how they look at their leadership and their task. Data scientists are actually trained formally to doubt. And what I mean by that is you get 3 or 4 semesters of training of why you might be wrong. And in fact, you are given quantifications of how wrong you likely are. So p-values, confidence intervals are literally quantification of how wrong you might be. So we're asked to understand uncertainties. We're asked to present the limitations that are likely in our own studies. We're asked to address our own potential bias. And then business leaders are not trained in advanced statistics or communication skills. And data scientists are not trained in business management or communication skills. So when we think about these trainings, this is how you are good at what you do. We see that we have been trained almost opposite in how we are supposed to assess the work that we're doing. So I'll tell you a little story. I was just out of grad school in my first job, and it was at the Travelers Insurance Company where they put in the first corporate fitness center on the East Coast. And we had data to assess how well that fitness and health facility might be affecting the population. Now, this is 1986, so we did not have a lot of information, not a lot of data. And I'm brand new. And one day, the CEO was at our location. He was being kind and asking me what I was doing and how I was doing it. And he started wondering out loud when he heard about the data, whether or not we could assess the excess cost of certain health risk factors, because we had HRA data as well as claims data. And this was one of the first times these were available. So after he left, I was excited. I am this newbie and I am going to do a discovery. So I quickly ran a quick regression and I could calculate the excess cost per cigarette. So I put together a memo. Now I knew that I hadn't controlled for age or gender or number of illnesses or anything else. But I thought if I just sent him a memo with something that was preliminary to show that I was being responsive, then I could give that answer to him. And so I sent the result. I sent all of the limitations, said it was preliminary, and thought, wow, I did a great thing because I responded within 24 hours. And I didn't hear anything. And 3 weeks later, the head of marketing called and he said, "Where's the report about smoking?" And I said, "What report about smoking?" And he said, "The smoking report on the cost of smoking." And I said, "There's no report on smoking." And he said, "Well, Don, the CEO, just presented it at a conference and the New York Times wants to publish it." So as you see, you can be put into a situation where one side thinks that there's possibility of great errors and knew that it was not correct. It just was preliminary. And the other side wants to make sure that we can run with it. So I won't go into all the details of where that ended up. But what you can see is that one side saw this as an opportunity for great publicity, whereas I saw it as the possibility that I either would be fired for not having a report, or I would be the laughingstock of every scientific academic in my field. That is where the clash happens. We also have different values which are related to this idea of doubt. So the sales professionals are trained to beat the competition, and they will do it and use every tool at their disposal. So they want to use every advantage. And again, early in my career, I ended up being teamed with a charismatic, charming, lovely salesperson who was described as the person who could sell an anchor to a drowning man. And he probably could. And he would say to me, "I'm not really lying, Wendy. I am just presenting the truth in its most favorable light." So it was an education for me being an academic, and I was trying to be as supportive as I possibly could. And he said, "Just stop putting the limitations in there, and we're just going to go with what it is that you find." Well, of course, I'm still in that category of I'm not quite sure. I want to be correct. I want to be cautious. I want to be factual. I don't want to embellish. I want to highlight what's wrong and admit what you don't know. So I want to take the time. And so many, many times in my career, I have done the best that I can. I have admitted what I don't know. But I have had CEOs say to me, Wendy, I need you to be way more adamant about how good we are. And we ended up agreeing to disagree. And I told one CEO that I did not have the certainty gene. I wasn't born with it, because he would say we are by far the best solution and there is nobody better than us. And Wendy, I need you to say that. And I just couldn't. So we do have these tensions about our ability to be clear, but also be confident. And it will be tense. It just will. So there's also a difference in the kind of preferences about how we want people to perceive us and see us. So, for example, business leaders want to deliver results that are simple, clear, understandable, indisputable, convincing, whereas scientists want to show you that there are complexities, that there's something novel about what we found, to tell us how interesting it is and unique it is. And we want to tell you about all of the fancy things that we did in order to find this. So essentially, what we are comparing is a group that wants things to be so clear that it needs no explanation, who is working with a group who wants it to be so interesting that everybody wants an explanation. So if any of you have been at the interface between the analytic team and the business team putting together a PowerPoint, one group keeps taking out all of the detail. One group keeps adding all of the equations. I just last week had to take 3 equations out of a presentation because the audience was not going to have statistical training. So this is how we see a good presentation. Either so clear it needs no explanation versus so interesting everyone wants one. Again, an example. So when we are out in the world, assessing or evaluating an intervention, for example, like a health intervention, most of the people fall along a distribution where there's people who are really poor in this health factor. Let's say it's the most stressed or the highest cholesterol. And then there will be people who are healthier. They're not stressed and they have low cholesterol. And then there's a big group of people in the middle. And the way most interventions work is we target maybe the worst. We do an intervention and we help that low end. So we do have an impact, but it's usually one side or the other where we have an impact in one direction. So those of us who look at the data, we know that it most often happens at one end or the other. Well, with one intervention that I was a part of, we saw a shift in everybody. The people who started out the worst got better. The people who were in the middle got better. And the people who are at the high end got better. Amazing. Amazing. Those of us who look at the data, it's amazing. So we went to the CEO and we said, look at this shift in distribution. This is going to be great. And the CEO said, can you just stop it? Give me one line that goes up and to the right, because that's how people know that things got better. Forget those distributions. Stop making it complicated. So I called this factor revelation or reduction. They don't want to know that it's the only time this has ever been seen. They want you to be clear that things got better. So the clients all say, yes, things got better. So we have to remember what gets people excited. And I always have to remember, and the people that I coach have to remember, that some people think that statistics is fun or math is fun, and others, mostly like 90% of the population, don't. So as we think about what we present, we do have to balance who's presenting it and the audience to whom we will present. So I was early in my career supposed to present a result that was a little bit complicated, a little bit like that shift in distribution. And I was teamed with a VP of operations, and we were supposed to go out and present. And a couple of times he was supposed to present on his own. And at the last minute, something else came up. And so I needed to fill in. And it became clear to me, because this is early in my career and I didn't quite follow, that anytime that I had a statistical or a mathematic or a methodology issue in a presentation, then other people didn't want to present it. And that's because adults are used to being competent. They don't want me there negotiating for the price of the service, because I'm not necessarily expert in negotiation. And they don't want to be there getting questions about how we actually did a particular type of analysis. So we have to be careful about what people are comfortable with. And if they can't be confident, we need to make them comfortable or team with them so that each of us has our domain of expertise and not put out to dry so that they have to explain something different. Lastly, number 6 is this idea of an orientation to how you want to contribute to your job. So one of the startups that I worked with in the late 90s had a novel way of doing health interventions. And in the first year or so, several of us on our analytic team, scientific team, developed some new ideas that shaped how that intervention was going to work. And as we learned more and thought more about it, we came up with more and more ideas about how we might want to tweak it or how we might want to enhance it. And about a year and a half in, my CEO pulled me into his office and shut the door and said, "Wendy, we need a new idea like we need a hole in the head, because we have to get down to selling what we already have. We have to get streamlined and scale. And in order to achieve profitability, we can't be changing things all the time and changing how we market them and changing how we do all of those things." So it was a learning process for me about when I am useful in an organization and when I am a problem in an organization. And I learned to tell people that you will love me for 6 months and then you will hate me, because I knew where I belonged and where I didn't belong. And so the scientist will be wanting to continually solve the puzzle rather than trying to focus on how we can make the profit margin as high as possible. So those are our 6 ways that we may see a clash between business professionals and analysts. It's their personality, it's how they're trained, it's what their goals are, it's what their preferences are in how they present what they learned. It's where they're comfortable or not comfortable. And it's their orientation to how they contribute to their job. So where this leaves us is we have this building tension that leads to perspectives that aren't necessary or necessarily what has to happen, but I have seen this to the point of real conflict. One side thinks the other is wishy-washy. The other side thinks the business people are overconfident. One side thinks everything's way too slow and careful. The other says you make decisions way too fast. One side thinks it's too complicated. The other one says, why are you oversimplifying my elegant finding? One saying you're not paying attention to what the business needs. Like, Wendy, we don't need a new idea. Whereas the analysts think you're not seeing what our challenges are and how great we can contribute. Leaders think we get distracted from priorities, whereas analysts think the business people might be one-track minded. All of these things develop to make it extra hard for analytics in business to be successful. So what do we do now? There's a lot of things we can do, but a couple of them are just very simple. Number one, acknowledge this. It's actually kind of funny if you think about it. All of these ways that we are set up to not agree. And if we realize that there is real value to what the business needs to accomplish and how they need to operate, and there is real value to the insights that we can learn, and appreciate what we can do together and how the synergy could work. Now, that helps us move forward. But if we acknowledge these things rather than simply getting irritated because they don't think like we do, we will be in for trouble. The second thing that we can do is just about listening. What happens is that most of this conflict happens because one group spits out what they think and the other group spits out what they think. And we don't take time to really hear each other. And I like to say, would you rather spend 15 minutes having a conversation where we really understand what's going on, or spend 2 weeks getting the answer wrong? It really is that small of a trade-off. So think about how well you know your colleague. Can we work together along a greater part of the project rather than sending a request one way and an answer the other way? And lastly, you won't be surprised. My other advice, designate someone to be a translator, or more than one someone. Because if we can learn how to talk to both sides, speak both languages, appreciate what each one is going through, and act as that ally builder, then we will be able to achieve a much greater form of synergy, and we will be able to take advantage of analytics in a way that really serves the business. So we have a book, Become an Analytic Translator. If you haven't seen our earlier webinars, they are free, available on the analytictranslator.com site. And we also do a series of online trainings where we have the business person and the analyst talk to each other and have it go very, very wrong, and then do it again in a way that actually works and puts them on the same team. So I will stop there and see if there are questions. Is there anyone? Well, one question that I will answer that I know comes up a lot is, how do you begin? How do you start to make this relationship a little bit better? And my answer always is to schedule a time for conversations that aren't about a specific project, and get to know your colleague who is on that other side. Have a conversation about what their big challenges are, about what their big opportunities are. Really start to understand, if you are on the business side, how the data are used. If you're on the analytics side, understand what it is that they are facing. Because too often we assume that the other person understands what we are going through. And so we jump to conclusions about whether or not they are on our side. So I don't see any other questions, and I know we are at the end of time. So I want to say thank you for attending. Feel free to see all of the other webinars and join me again for the next one. Thanks, everybody.